The morning sun felt warm on Jake's face as he stepped out of his small farmhouse in rural Texas. His metal leg made a soft clicking sound with each step, a sound he'd grown used to over the past year and a half. The doctor said walking would help, both his body and his mind. So every morning, Jake would walk the same path through the field behind his house. Today felt different, though. Maybe it was the way the birds seemed quieter than usual, or how the wind carried an odd sound across the pasture. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He'd learned to trust these feelings during his time in the Marines. They'd kept him alive more than once, even though they couldn't save his leg from that roadside bomb in Afghanistan. Jake pushed through the tall grass, his prosthetic leg making each step slower than he'd like. Before his injury, he could run 5 miles without breaking a sweat. Now, a simple walk tired him out. But his therapist said he needed to keep moving, keep trying. "Your body needs to remember how to live again," she told him during their last session. The sound came again, clearer this time. It was definitely an animal in distress. Jake had heard enough wounded creatures during his military service to recognize the sound of something fighting for its life. His heart started beating faster, not from fear, but from something he hadn't felt in months: purpose. Following the sound, Jake pushed through a thick patch of bushes that scratched at his arms. On the other side, he found something that made him stop dead in his tracks. A massive horse, bigger than any he'd ever seen, was trapped in a nightmare of twisted metal and sharp wire. The old fence must have been there for years, forgotten, and left to rust in the Texas heat. The horse was beautiful even in his current state. His coat was dark brown, almost black, with muscles that spoke of incredible strength. But right now, that strength was working against him. Every time the horse tried to break free, the barbed wire cut deeper into his skin. Blood ran down his legs and sides, staining the ground beneath him red. Jake's military training kicked in immediately. He assessed the situation like he would have assessed a battlefield. The horse was panicked, which made him dangerous. Those hooves could easily crush a human skull. The wire was old but still sharp, wrapped around the horse's legs, neck, and body in a way that would only get tighter with movement. But it was the horse's eyes that really got to Jake. They were wide with terror, rolling white with panic. Jake had seen those same eyes in the mirror during his worst nights, when the nightmares wouldn't stop and the phantom pain in his missing leg felt like it was burning. This horse was trapped, just like Jake had been trapped in his own body and mind. Since coming home from war, the smart thing would be to call animal control or the local vet. Let the professionals handle it. Jake knew he wasn't in the best shape to help anyone, let alone a massive, panicked horse. His balance wasn't great with the prosthetic, and he tired easily. One wrong move and that horse could kill him without even meaning to. But as Jake stood there watching the horse struggle, something inside him shifted. For months he'd felt useless. The military had given him purpose, a mission, brothers to fight alongside. Coming home to an empty house and a disability check had left him feeling like half a man. Everyone said he was a hero, but heroes didn't spend their days taking pain pills and avoiding phone calls from worried family members. This horse needed him, right here, right now. Someone's life depended on what Jake chose to do next. It didn't matter that he was broken too. It didn't matter that his leg was gone or that his hands sometimes shook from medication. What mattered was that he was here, and he had the skills to help. Jake pulled out his phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Out here in the middle of nowhere, he was truly on his own. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and by the time he could get help, the horse might bleed out or hurt himself worse trying to escape. The horse's breathing was getting more labored. Jake could see foam around his mouth, a sign of extreme stress. Time was running out. Jake had to make a choice: walk away and hope someone else would find the horse in time, or step up and do what he'd been trained to do his whole adult life: help when help was needed. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out his old combat knife. The handle was worn smooth from years of use, and the blade was still sharp. He'd used it to cut through everything from rope to metal during his deployments. Today he'd use it to cut through wire and maybe, just maybe, cut through some of the darkness that had been surrounding his own life. The horse saw him approaching and tried to rear up, but the wire held him down. Jake spoke softly, the way his grandfather had taught him to talk to animals when he was a kid growing up on his family's small ranch. "Easy there, big guy. I'm here to help. I know you're scared, but we're going to get through this together." Something in Jake's voice seemed to calm the horse slightly. The wild rolling of his eyes slowed and his breathing steadied just a bit. Jake took another step closer, his metal leg sinking slightly into the soft earth. The horse watched him with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand that this human was different from whatever had put him in this trap. Jake knelt down next to the horse's front leg, where several strands of wire had wrapped tight around the powerful limb. Up close, he could see the damage was worse than he'd thought. Some of the cuts were deep, and the wire had been there long enough that it had started to embed in the skin. This was going to take time, patience, and more skill than Jake was sure he still possessed. His hands hadn't been steady since he'd come home, and working this close to a 1,000-pound animal that could panic at any moment would test every bit of training he'd ever received. But as Jake positioned his knife against the first strand of wire, he felt something he hadn't experienced in over a year. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. For the first time since losing his leg, Jake felt like himself again. He had a mission, and he was going to complete it, no matter what it took. Jake's knife cut through the first strand of wire with a sharp snap that made the horse flinch. "Sorry, buddy," Jake whispered, keeping his voice calm and steady. "I know that scared you, but we've got to get you out of here." The horse's ear flicked toward him as if he was listening to every word. Working with barbed wire was like defusing a bomb. One wrong move could make everything worse. Jake had learned patience during his military service, spending hours carefully dismantling explosive devices that could kill him and his squad with one mistake. This felt similar, except instead of saving soldiers, he was saving a horse who reminded him of the powerful animals he'd worked with overseas. The first leg was the hardest. The wire had been wrapped around it so many times that Jake had to cut each loop individually. Every time his knife got close to the horse's skin, he held his breath. One slip could cause serious damage. Sweat dripped down his face despite the cool morning air. His prosthetic leg made it hard to keep his balance while kneeling, and several times he had to catch himself with his free hand. The horse seemed to understand that Jake was trying to help. Instead of fighting, he stood as still as possible, only moving when the pain became too much. When Jake finally freed the first leg, the horse lifted it carefully, testing his weight. Blood still dripped from the cuts, but he could move again. "One down, 3 to go," Jake said, wiping sweat from his eyes. His shirt was already soaked through, and they'd only been at this for an hour, but Jake felt more alive than he had in months. Every strand of wire he cut was a small victory, proof that he could still do something meaningful with his life. The second leg was wrapped even tighter. The horse had struggled so much that the wire had twisted into knots that seemed impossible to untangle. Jake's hands started to cramp from gripping the knife so tightly, but he didn't stop. He thought about all the times his squad had depended on him to keep them safe, to solve problems that seemed impossible. This horse was depending on him the same way. As Jake worked, he started talking to the horse about everything and nothing. He told him about his hometown in Texas, about his family's old ranch, about the horses he'd ridden as a kid. The horse's ears moved back and forth following the sound of Jake's voice. It seemed to calm both of them. "You know what, big guy? I think you and I have something in common," Jake said as he carefully worked his knife under a particularly tight piece of wire. "We're both stuck in places we don't want to be, but maybe we can help each other out." The wire around the horse's neck was the most dangerous part. It was wrapped close to major blood vessels, and one wrong cut could be fatal. Jake had to lie on his back and slide under the horse's massive head to reach some of the wire. The horse could have easily stepped on him or crushed him, but instead he carefully lifted his hooves whenever Jake needed to move. Jake's prosthetic was making everything harder. The leg wasn't designed for this kind of work, and the weight distribution was all wrong when he had to contort his body to reach the wire. Several times, sharp metal edges caught on his pants and shirt, leaving tears in the fabric and shallow cuts on his skin. But Jake didn't care. He'd taken worse hits in combat. By the third hour, Jake's whole body ached. His stump, where his prosthetic attached, was starting to chafe and burn. His back was screaming from all the awkward positions he'd had to get into. But the horse was almost free. Just a few more strands around his hindquarters, and they'd be done. The hardest part came when Jake had to work near the horse's back legs. Horses could kick hard enough to kill a person, and this horse was still stressed and in pain. Jake approached slowly, talking constantly to let the horse know where he was. "I'm coming around behind you now, buddy. I know you don't like it, but I've got to get this last bit of wire." As Jake knelt behind the horse, his prosthetic leg gave out completely. He fell forward, his hand instinctively reaching out to catch himself. His palm landed right on the horse's flank, and Jake expected to be kicked into next week. Instead, the horse just turned his head to look at him, as if checking to make sure he was okay. "Thanks for not killing me," Jake laughed, getting back to his feet. His leg was definitely done for the day, but he was so close to finishing. Just a few more cuts, and this beautiful animal would be free. The last strand of wire was the thickest, wrapped tight around the horse's powerful hindquarters. Jake's knife was getting dull from all the cutting, and this piece was fighting him. He had to saw back and forth, his hand cramping with each movement. The horse shifted his weight, clearly ready to be done with this whole ordeal. Finally, with a sharp snap that echoed across the field, the last piece of wire fell away. The horse was free. Jake stepped back, expecting the massive animal to bolt away from the place where he'd been trapped for who knows how long. Instead, the horse just stood there looking at Jake with those intelligent dark eyes. Blood still covered his coat, and he was clearly exhausted. But he was free. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Jake couldn't believe what he'd just accomplished. 3 hours ago, he'd been just another disabled veteran taking a walk to clear his head. Now he'd saved a life. He'd done something that mattered, something that required all the skills and courage he thought he'd lost when that bomb took his leg. The horse took a step toward Jake, then another. Jake held perfectly still, not wanting to spook him now that he was free. The horse's massive head came down, and Jake felt warm breath on his hands. Then, gentle as could be, the horse nuzzled Jake's palm with his soft muzzle. Jake felt tears running down his cheeks, but for the first time in over a year, they weren't tears of frustration or pain. They were tears of something he'd almost forgotten: joy. This huge, powerful animal was thanking him, and in that moment Jake felt like maybe, just maybe, he could find his way back to being the man he used to be. The horse stepped back and shook himself, sending pieces of dried blood and debris flying. He was hurt and tired, but he was alive and free. Jake watched as the horse tested each leg, making sure everything still worked. Satisfied, the horse looked back at Jake one more time, as if memorizing his face. Then, instead of running away, the horse walked slowly toward the shade of a big oak tree at the edge of the field. He stood there watching Jake, as if he didn't want to leave his rescuer behind. Jake realized he had a new problem. This horse was injured and needed medical care. But whose horse was it? And what was Jake supposed to do now? He'd saved the horse's life, but the job wasn't finished yet. Jake spent the rest of that day trying to find the horse's owner. He posted photos on every social media platform he could think of, called the local sheriff's office, and even drove to nearby farms asking if anyone was missing a horse. But nobody claimed the massive animal that had taken up residence under the oak tree in Jake's backfield. The horse, who Jake had started calling Thunder because of his size and dark color, hadn't moved far from where he'd been freed. He seemed content to graze in the shade, keeping one eye on Jake's house at all times. Every few hours, Jake would walk out to check on him, bringing fresh water in an old bucket and trying to clean some of the deeper cuts with supplies from his first aid kit. By the third day, it was clear that Thunder wasn't going anywhere. Jake found himself looking forward to their twice-daily visits. There was something peaceful about standing next to the big horse, something that quieted the constant noise in Jake's head. The nightmares that usually kept him awake seemed less scary when he knew Thunder was just outside his window. Jake's disability check barely covered his own expenses, let alone veterinary bills for a horse. But when he saw how deep some of Thunder's cuts were, he knew he had to do something. He called Dr. Williams, the local vet, and explained the situation. "I'll come take a look," Dr. Williams said over the phone. But Jake, you need to understand that caring for a horse is expensive, and if this animal has been on his own for a while, there could be other problems we can't see yet. When Dr. Williams arrived, Thunder was nervous around the stranger. But when Jake stood next to him and spoke softly, the horse calmed down enough for the vet to examine him. What they found was both better and worse than Jake had expected. The good news is that most of these cuts will heal just fine with proper care, Dr. Williams said, running his hands along Thunder's legs. The bad news is that this horse has been on his own for a long time. He's underweight and some of these wounds show signs of infection. We're looking at antibiotics, special feed, and careful monitoring for the next few months. Jake did quick math in his head. Even with Dr. Williams offering a payment plan, the cost would eat up most of his savings. But when he looked at Thunder, who was watching him with those trusting dark eyes, Jake knew he couldn't turn his back on the animal that had somehow brought purpose back into his life. Do what you need to do, Doc. Thunder and I will figure it out. Over the next few weeks, Jake threw himself into caring for Thunder with the same intensity he'd once brought to his military duties. He researched horse care online, learning about nutrition, wound treatment, and behavior. His old barn, which had been used for storage since he'd bought the property, was cleaned out and converted into a proper stall. Jake discovered that taking care of Thunder required him to be active in ways his physical therapy had never achieved. Carrying water buckets strengthened his arms and core. Walking Thunder around the property for exercise helped Jake's own mobility. The daily routine of feeding, grooming, and checking on the horse gave structure to days that had previously felt endless and empty. But it was the emotional connection that really changed everything. Thunder seemed to sense when Jake was having a bad day. On mornings when the phantom pain in his missing leg was particularly bad, Jake would find Thunder standing by the fence closest to his house as if keeping watch. When nightmares woke Jake in the middle of the night, he started going outside to sit with Thunder instead of lying in bed fighting the memories. The horse had his own struggles too. Loud noises made him jumpy, and he was clearly afraid of anything that looked like rope or wire. Jake recognized the signs of trauma in Thunder the same way he'd learned to recognize them in himself. They were both damaged, but somehow, taking care of each other made them both stronger. Jake started talking to Thunder about everything, his time in the military, losing his leg, feeling lost and useless since coming home. The horse never judged, never offered advice Jake didn't want to hear. He just listened with those patient eyes and occasionally nuzzled Jake's shoulder when the stories got too heavy. "You know what I think, Thunder?" Jake said one evening as he brushed the horse's coat until it gleamed. "I think we found each other for a reason. Maybe we were both exactly where we needed to be that morning." Word about Jake and Thunder spread through the small community. Neighbors who barely knew Jake started stopping by to check on the horse and ended up staying to talk. Jake found himself socializing more than he had since returning from deployment. People were interested in Thunder's rescue story, but they also seemed genuinely interested in Jake himself. Mrs. Patterson from down the road brought homemade cookies and stayed to watch Jake work with Thunder. "That horse trusts you completely," she observed. "Animals know good people when they meet them." Jake's nephew visited for the first time since Jake had come home. 12-year-old Tyler had been scared of his uncle since the injury, not knowing what to say or how to act. But with Thunder there as a focus, the awkwardness disappeared. Tyler spent the whole afternoon learning to groom the horse and peppered Jake with questions about rescue techniques and horse care. "Uncle Jake, you're like a real-life hero," Tyler said as they fed Thunder carrots. "You saved Thunder's life." For the first time, Jake actually believed it might be true. Not the hero part. He'd never been comfortable with that label. But the part about saving a life, about making a difference. Thunder was living proof that Jake still had value, that his skills and courage meant something even if his body was different now. The horse's wounds healed slowly but steadily. His coat grew shinier as proper nutrition filled out his frame. But more importantly, the fear in his eyes was gradually replaced by contentment. Thunder had found his place just like Jake was starting to find his. 3 months after the rescue, Jake was cleaning Thunder's stall when he heard a vehicle pulling into his driveway. Through the barn door, He could see a professional-looking trailer with a business logo on the side. His heart sank. After all this time, had Thunder's real owner finally come to claim him? A woman got out of the truck and walked toward the barn. She was probably in her 40s with short brown hair and the kind of confident stride that spoke of years working with animals. Jake wiped his hands on his jeans and went out to meet her, Thunder following closely behind. "Are you Jake?" the woman asked. "I'm Dr. Chen. I think you have my horse." Jake's heart dropped into his stomach. After everything they'd been through together, was he about to lose Thunder? But as Dr. Chen looked at the horse, then at Jake, her expression wasn't what he'd expected. Instead of demanding her property back, she looked curious, almost amazed. "I have to say," Dr. Chen continued, "I've never seen Thunder look this good. When he went missing 6 months ago, I thought we'd lost him for good. What you've done here is remarkable." Jake found his voice. "He was trapped in barbed wire when I found him. I couldn't just leave him there." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "I can see the scars from the wire, but I can also see that he's been professionally cared for. Thunder hasn't looked this relaxed and healthy in years. You clearly have a gift for this work." Jake didn't know what to say. He'd assumed Dr. Chen would thank him and load Thunder into her trailer. Instead, she seemed to be studying both of them with professional interest. "Tell me," Dr. Chen said, "what do you know about therapy horses?" Jake stared at Dr. Chen, trying to process what she'd just asked. "Therapy horses? I don't know much about that. Thunder just helps me feel better, I guess." Dr. Chen smiled, and Jake could see kindness in her eyes that reminded him of the best officers he'd served under. "That's exactly what therapy horses do, Jake. They help people feel better. But what you've accomplished here goes way beyond basic comfort. May I ask about your background?" Jake found himself telling Dr. Chen about his military service, his injury, and how lost he'd felt since coming home. He explained how finding Thunder had given him purpose again, how caring for the horse had helped him more than any medication or counseling session. "Thunder was part of my program when he escaped during transport," Dr. Chen explained. "I run a therapeutic riding center about an hour from here. We use horses to help people with all kinds of challenges, veterans with PTSD, children with disabilities, people recovering from trauma. Thunder was one of our most promising horses, but he'd never bonded with anyone the way he has with you." Jake looked at Thunder, who was standing calmly between them, occasionally nuzzling Jake's arm. "So you want to take him back?" Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, studying both Jake and Thunder. "Actually, I was hoping to make you an offer. What if instead of me taking Thunder back, you both came to work with me?" Jake felt his heart skip a beat. "I don't understand. In all my years working with therapy horses, I've never seen a natural partnership like yours," Dr. Chen continued. "Thunder responds to you better than horses that have been in training for years. And your military background gives you skills that would be perfect for this work. Patience, attention to detail, the ability to stay calm in stressful situations." Jake shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not qualified for that kind of work. I'm just a guy with a prosthetic leg who happened to find a horse in trouble." "Jake, do you know what equine-assisted therapy is?" Dr. Chen asked. When Jake shook his head, she continued. "It's using horses to help people heal from trauma, build confidence, and learn new skills. The horses don't judge, they don't care about disabilities, and they respond to genuine emotion. What you've been doing with Thunder for the past 3 months is exactly that. Therapy." Jake thought about all the ways Thunder had helped him, the nightmares that came less frequently, the phantom pain that seemed manageable when he was focused on horse care, the confidence he'd started to feel again. But that was just for me. What if it didn't have to be? Dr. Chen asked. What if you could help other veterans, other people who are struggling the way you were? Your story, your connection with Thunder, it could inspire people who think their injuries have ended their ability to contribute. The idea was overwhelming. Jake had spent so many months feeling like a burden, like someone who needed help rather than someone who could provide it. The thought that he might actually be qualified to help others seemed too good to be true. I'd need training, Jake said slowly. Of course. We'd start with basic certification in equine-assisted activities and therapies. You'd learn about different types of trauma, safety protocols, how to structure therapeutic sessions. But Jake, the most important qualities can't be taught. Empathy, patience, genuine care for both horses and people. You already have those. Thunder seemed to sense the importance of the conversation. He moved closer to Jake, resting his massive head on Jake's shoulder in a gesture that had become familiar over the past months. Jake reached up to stroke the horse's neck, feeling the steady heartbeat that had become a source of comfort. "What would happen to Thunder?" Jake asked. "He'd become a certified therapy horse working with you as a team. You'd live on the property. We have a small apartment above the barn that comes with the job. Thunder would have his own stall and access to pastures with other horses. You'd work together, helping people who need exactly what you two have found, with each other." Jake's mind raced with possibilities and fears. What if he wasn't good at helping other people? What if his own struggles interfered with his ability to be therapeutic for others? What if Thunder didn't work as well with strangers? As if reading his thoughts, Dr. Chen said, "I won't lie to you, Jake. This work isn't easy. You'll meet people who are angry, depressed, sometimes hostile. You'll hear stories that break your heart. But you'll also see breakthroughs that seem impossible. You'll watch people discover they're stronger than they thought, just like you did." Jake remembered his nephew Tyler, how the boy's fear had melted away when they worked with Thunder together. He thought about Mrs. Patterson, how she'd opened up about her late husband's struggles with depression after watching Jake and Thunder together. Maybe Dr. Chen was right. Maybe he did have something valuable to offer. "Can I think about it?" Jake asked. "Of course. But I want you to know something," Dr. Chen said. "When Thunder escaped 6 months ago, I thought we'd lost not just a horse, but an opportunity to help a lot of people. Now I think maybe Thunder knew exactly what he was doing. Maybe he needed to find you first, needed to heal himself before he could help heal others." After Dr. Chen left, Jake sat in Thunder's pasture for hours, thinking about everything she'd said. The horse grazed peacefully nearby, occasionally coming over to check on Jake. As the sun started to set, Jake made his decision. He pulled out his phone and called Dr. Chen. "I want to do it," he said when she answered. "Thunder and I want to help." "I was hoping you'd say that," Dr. Chen replied, and Jake could hear the smile in her voice. "Welcome to the team, Jake, both of you." That night, Jake's sleep was peaceful for the first time in months. Outside his window, Thunder stood quietly in his pasture, and Jake knew that together, they were about to start a new chapter. Not just healing themselves, but helping others find their own path back to wholeness. The wounded veteran who had thought his useful life was over was about to discover that his greatest mission was just beginning. And the horse who had been trapped in wire and fear was about to become a beacon of hope for others who felt just as trapped in their own struggles. Sometimes, Jake thought as he drifted off to sleep, the best rescues are the ones where everybody saves everybody else. 6 months later, Jake stood in the main arena of Dr. Chen's therapeutic riding center, watching Thunder work with a young veteran named David, who had lost both legs in a vehicle accident overseas. David sat in his wheelchair next to Thunder's massive frame, his hands shaking as he reached out to touch the horse's neck for the first time. "He's so big," David whispered, his voice filled with the same fear Jake remembered feeling about many things since his own injury. "Thunder's gentle as a lamb," Jake said, keeping his voice calm and encouraging. "He knows you're nervous and he's going to let you set the pace. See how he's keeping his head low? That's his way of saying he's not a threat." Jake had learned so much during his training. The science behind equine therapy fascinated him, how horses could lower blood pressure, reduce anxiety, and help people rebuild confidence in ways that traditional therapy sometimes couldn't achieve. But the real education came from watching Thunder work with client after client, each one teaching Jake something new about the healing process. Today was David's 3rd session, and Jake could already see changes. The first day, David had barely been able to look at Thunder. The second session, he'd managed to touch the horse's shoulder while staying in his wheelchair. Today, they were working on grooming, which would require David to move around Thunder's body, and use both hands in coordinated movements. Remember what we talked about, Jake said as David picked up a soft brush. Thunder doesn't care about your wheelchair or your prosthetics. All he cares about is how you treat him. You're in charge here. As David began brushing Thunder's coat, Jake saw the young man's shoulders relax for the first time since he'd arrived. Thunder stood perfectly still, occasionally turning his head to look at David with those patient, understanding eyes that had helped Jake through his own darkest moments. "I used to work with horses before I enlisted," David said quietly, his hands moving more confidently with the brush. "My granddad had a small farm. I thought I'd never be able to do this again." "What made you think that?" Jake asked, genuinely curious. David paused in his brushing. "I guess I thought being in a wheelchair meant I couldn't be useful around animals anymore, like I was too broken to take care of anything else." Jake felt a familiar ache in his chest. He'd had those exact same thoughts after losing his leg. "You know what Thunder taught me?" Jake said. "Being broken doesn't mean being useless. Sometimes the best healers are the ones who understand what it feels like to need healing." By the end of the session, David was laughing as Thunder gently searched his pockets for the carrots they always brought as treats. The transformation from fearful to confident had happened in less than an hour, but Jake knew the effects would last much longer. After David left, Jake found Dr. Chen watching from the observation area. "That was beautiful work," she said. "David's been stuck in depression since his injury 6 months ago. This is the first time his wife has seen him smile." Jake felt a familiar swell of pride and purpose. Every successful session reminded him why he'd chosen this path. Thunder did most of the work. I just translated. "Don't sell yourself short," Dr. Chen said. "David trusts you because he can see you understand his struggle. That's not something you can teach in a classroom." Jake's days were full now in ways they hadn't been since his military service. Each morning started with caring for Thunder and the other therapy horses. Then came sessions with clients, veterans dealing with PTSD, children with autism who found communication easier with horses than humans, adults recovering from traumatic brain injuries who rebuilt coordination through riding. The work was emotionally demanding. Jake heard stories that broke his heart and met people who challenged every skill he'd developed. But it was also incredibly rewarding. He'd watched a teenage girl who hadn't spoken since a car accident whisper her first words to Thunder. He'd seen a veteran with severe anxiety lead a horse through an obstacle course, proving to himself that he could still accomplish difficult tasks. Thunder had transformed too. The nervous, injured horse Jake had found tangled in wire had become one of the most trusted therapy animals at the center. His size, which had once made him seem intimidating, now provided a sense of security for clients who felt small and powerless. His gentle nature and intuitive understanding of human emotion made him perfect for the most challenging cases. Jake's reputation in the therapeutic community grew. Other facilities asked him to speak at conferences about his journey from patient to practitioner. Veterinary schools invited him to lecture about the human-animal bond in healing. But Jake was most proud of the letters he received from former clients, updating him on their progress and thanking him for helping them rediscover their own strength. One letter particularly moved him. It was from David, the young veteran from that morning's session. "Before I met you and Thunder," David wrote, "I thought my life was over. I thought being in a wheelchair meant I couldn't be strong or useful anymore. Watching you work, seeing how Thunder responds to you, made me realize that healing isn't about going back to who we were. It's about becoming who we're meant to be." Next, Jake kept that letter in his desk drawer and read it whenever he had doubts about his chosen path. On difficult days, when a session didn't go well or when his own phantom pain flared up, David's words reminded him that his work mattered. The local newspaper eventually picked up Jake and Thunder's story. The headline read, "Wounded Warrior" and "Rescued Horse Help Others Heal." But Jake knew the real story was more complex than any newspaper could capture. It was about second chances, about finding purpose in unexpected places, about the power of connection between species. Dr. Chen approached Jake on a quiet Thursday afternoon as he was preparing Thunder for their next client. "I have a proposition for you," she said. The state wants to expand our program to other locations. They've asked me to recommend someone to run a new facility about an hour north of here. Interested? Jake looked at Thunder, who was watching their conversation with curious eyes. Would Thunder come with me? I wouldn't dream of splitting up the team, Dr. Chen smiled. You two have proven that the best therapy comes from authentic partnerships. The new facility would be yours to run, with a full staff and resources to help even more people. The idea of starting his own program was both exciting and terrifying. But as Jake considered the possibility, he realized how far he'd come from the lost, angry man who'd stumbled across a trapped horse 18 months ago. That man couldn't have imagined running a therapeutic facility or helping dozens of people find their own paths to healing. I'll do it, Jake said, running his hand along Thunder's neck. We'll do it. 6 months later, Jake stood in front of his new facility watching contractors install a sign that read, Thunder Ridge Therapeutic Center. Thunder grazed peacefully in the pasture, already comfortable in their new home. Their first clients would arrive next week, a group of veterans from the local VA hospital who had volunteered to try equine therapy. Jake thought about that morning when he'd found Thunder trapped in wire, both of them broken and lost. Neither of them could have predicted where that rescue would lead. Thunder had found his calling as a healer, and Jake had discovered that his greatest service wasn't behind him. It was just beginning. As the sun set over Thunder Ridge, Jake felt a peace he'd never thought possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people who needed help finding their way back to themselves. But tonight he was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The wounded veteran and the rescued horse had become something either could have achieved alone, a beacon of hope for others who thought their stories had ended, showing them that sometimes the most beautiful chapters are the ones that come after everything falls apart. Thunder raised his head from grazing and looked toward Jake as if sensing his thoughts. Jake walked over and rested his forehead against the horse's neck, feeling grateful for the day that terrible accident had become the foundation for something wonderful. They had both learned that being saved and saving others weren't separate things. They were part of the same endless circle of healing that connects all living things. And their story was just beginning.